All right. So my name is Jimmy, and for my presentation, I'll be advocating for gun violence restraining orders. So, and then for my research process, I wanted to talk about how that I had to find different solutions for the problem for gun violence, and that I looked up a lot of solutions such as the assault on or bans on assault weapons and also limits on bullet magazines for assault weapons. But I found that there were many flaws to the solution, and doing more research on certain websites, I found that gun violence restraining orders would be the best solution for this problem because it has many benefits, which I will include later in my presentation. So for the problem, the huge problem is that gun violence is a really big problem or a huge issue, and also a sensitive subject in politics today. And that according to Every Town for Gun Safety, it states that on an average day there are nearly 12,000 homicides a year in the United States, and then also that America's gun homicide rate is more than 25 times the average of other developed countries, and that the United States also owns a large amount of firearms. For gun regulation and obstacles, that even though we have gun control legislation, there are two sides to the story, and that in politics, Democrats and Republicans have different views on them. And for Democrats, including President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Senator Tim Kaine, and also U.S. Member Representative Gabby Giffords, is support gun regulation. And also groups such as the Brady Campaign and the website, the Every Town for Gun Safety, also support gun control because they wanted to not have criminals obtain firearms. For obstacles for gun control legislation, there are obviously Republicans who defend the Second Amendment, such as Ted Cruz, who recently got endorsed by the gun right owners of America, and the NRA especially was that it was formed to advocate for citizens to own firearms to protect themselves. And move on. Oh yeah, and then these two pictures was about how the NRA is for this one is that the NRA is here to defend their rights, the Second Amendment, and also that the Brady campaign, which was a law in 1994, it expanded on background checks so that criminals aren't able to get them easier. For my next slide, it's about the attempted solutions that I found, and for this one was the ban on assault weapons because some people might deem them as dangerous and that they kill a large amount of people in a short amount of time. However, there was a flaw to this solution because groups like Native American, they use guns for cultural practices. So in my advocacy project that I noted that Native Americans use these for not just cultural practices, but also to defend themselves because they have a high rate of crime there. So then also the next solution was the 10 limit bullet magazine. That the solution was fairly better than the ban, but some people do not support the 10 bullet limit on the magazine because even though there is criminals can reload firearms fairly quick, that it doesn't help with the mass killings because 10 bullets is still a lot. And recent incidents such as Sandy Hook and the 2011 Tucson shooting with the U.S. member Representative Gabby Giffords, where she was shot in the head, it doesn't really help the problem with gun control. So my solution is to have My gun solution is to have a gun violence restraining order, which is just like a domestic restraining order, but with firearms. And that I chose this one because it was. I'll go back to the slide, but the benefits of gun violence restraining order was that it accounts for also suicides and homicides, and it does not violate the Second Amendment, and also that it's a modern system to evaluate mental illness quickly. And solution works for both gun control and gun control advocates because it specifically targets people who are unfit to own firearms. And how this process works is, I'll zoom in. So the first one is to identify the individual in crisis and at risk of dangerous behavior. So family members and loved ones and also law enforcement can file a gun violence restraining order on someone who looks like they are incompetent to own a weapon. And the next process is to contact law enforcement or local court clerk for details on initiating a gun violence restraining order. And then the next step was to complete the required forms and initiate a court process. So this will be evaluated by a judge. And after that, the first court proceeding to rule whether subject poses an immediate or present threat, danger. So with this shows that if someone is really unstable, mentally unstable, that they can go into their house and remove firearms from their possession so that they don't go on a rampage in theory. So a judge can issue a ex parte or emergency order, and it lasts up to 21 days. And then for this one, this is really significant because it says subject is temporarily prohibited from the purchase and possession of firearms for the duration of that order. Law enforcement will remove any known firearms that haven't been surrendered by the subject. So then this shows that if they wanted to buy a new weapon, they're blocked from the background check because of their background check. So then they're unable to access firearms. And then, let's see. Yeah, so this is basically the summation of all this is just extra info. So then that's basically how gun violence restraining orders work. And that this is really good because talking about the benefits, that when we talk about gun violence, we only think about like mass shootings, and that we don't account for also suicides and also homicides. Or we don't just take into account suicides because in according to one of my articles in the Advocacy project, that a lot of people, just like Japan, they have low firearm rates, but they have really high suicide rates. So then having guns doesn't mean that like it's more safe for the community, because people also face like depression and anxiety and a lot of other emotions that can make them unstable. And that is basically it. Are there any questions that you have?
Yeah, I have one question. So you were saying how this keeps people who are like, mentally unstable from harming others or themselves. But
Yeah.
how would it detect people? Because some people are like, I don't know if you've heard of antisocial disorder, where they seem like they're normal, but they're really a sociopath. So how does it account for people who maybe don't show that they're unstable, but really they could obtain a firearm easily and go and wreak havoc? Like, how does it prevent normal people who may not show signs of like instability?
So your question is that how do you detect people who are antisocial, right?
Right, basically who don't seem unstable but really are.
So yeah, one of the drawbacks of the gun violence restraining order is that because the time period of when it can be issued and it initiates the court process, that person can also go on like a rampage during that short amount of time. But for antisocial people, the best way is that if there isn't a loved one, a law enforcement officer can detect, like, if they're going, let's say, because they will show signs of not being, I guess, normal. So then the police officer can assess that and say that, oh, there might be a gun violence restraining order that might be needed for this person because they're not showing signs of normalcy.
Okay.
Yeah. Are
Um,
there any other questions?
and then, so how is this different than like maybe having stricter gun laws? Or why is this better than having just stricter gun laws for a majority of people rather than this seems like, oh, let's target the individuals who may be unstable?
So what I really like about this solution is that it works for, in my benefit. I said that it works for both gun control advocates and anti-gun control advocates because it's easier to enforce rather than gun control laws.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so an example would be the 10 limit bullet on the assault weapon. It's harder to enforce because some people can hide that,
Mm-hmm.
compared to a gun violence restraining order. Is that if they're trying to purchase a firearm, it's denied, they're denied access because of that order, and that it's easier to enforce. And also it works for both sides because in states like California has very strict gun laws, so it's hard to purchase one, but it's hard to enforce like a 10 limit bullet magazine on a state like I think like Louisiana, where they have really high gun ownership. So
Mm-hmm.
then it's like more flexible and able to enforce the restraining order because it only targets the people who are incompetent compared to for everyone.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, then, for watching.
No problem.
Let me pause.